righty, we are here with Damon Young. How you doing, Damon?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for coming on. Can you just give a brief intro? Who is Damon Young?
Who is Damon Young? Damon Young is a father and husband primarily. I have 5 wonderful kids ranging from 24 years old to 11.
Okay.
And been happily married for 25 years to Kate Young.
Congrats, 25, that's big.
Yeah, it was last December was our 25th mark. And I am primarily a lifelong Wichitan. I was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Wow, okay.
And my dad was in the restaurant business, and we moved around a ton. And found myself back in Wichita. My parents are both from Wichita, but I was here around 5 years old, and then moved to Texas. And then my parents were divorced when I was 7. Came back, was primarily in Wichita off and on, and then went away for college a little bit, and then came back in 1999. I've been here.
Okay.
Been here since.
Awesome. Did you graduate high school in Wichita?
I graduated high school from Arkansas City High School.
Okay.
So I went there my junior and senior year. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
In terms of schools in Wichita, it was in small, like, homeschool, co-op type of environments. I went to 259 elementary school for a couple years, went to John Marshall Middle School,
Okay.
and then I went to North for freshman and sophomore year.
Okay. Was that hard moving in the middle of high school?
Yes.
I imagine.
Yeah. Moving is one of the, when I think about the themes of my younger life, moving was part of it. When I was doing research many years back on learning more about trauma and ACEs scores and that whole thing about our adverse childhood experiences, for those not in the ACEs world. And I started to unpack my own childhood, and I realized how often I moved. I think I did the math one time, and it was something like my first 18 years I moved. I lived in, I think, 15 different houses. And I didn't go to the same school for more than 2 years, ever.
That's wild. That's wild. I can't imagine. It'd be hard to establish any roots or friend groups or anything.
Yeah, in the absence, as I reflect back on it, like anything, there's a theme in the Bible that talks about, what the enemy meant for bad, God will use for good, and as I reflect on that in my own life, I think that the resilience that I have, that's a theme. The idea that I'm always looking to what's next. I think I learned that. I learned to be resilient. I learned to look for what's next. The idea of seeing connections where maybe sometimes other people don't see them, I think is a direct byproduct of being taken in and out of many different situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then our brains are so crazy that it's always trying to make sense. And so I think sense making is something that has become a skill as an adult. But it's because I think I felt pretty powerless and things weren't making sense a lot as a young person. And so I was wanting to make sense.
Right.
But I think another thing about me is I love people. And I think even that, when I reflect back, not having long-standing relationships. I was just at a coffee shop this morning, and you know how it is in our coffee shop scene in Wichita, once you kind of know people, you end up just saying hi to so many people.
Oh yeah, you can't go to a coffee shop without running into a couple people. Yeah.
And it was really cool, and I gave someone a hug, and then the person, you could tell that the person that I was with and the person that we ran into, they knew each other, but they weren't on hugging status.
Yep.
But me and that person were, and so then they were like, well, now we're on hugging status.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they gave each other a hug.
Brings them into the fold.
And I just think how rich that is about how we can build that type of connection. And but I completely didn't have that as a young person. I had a solid core. My mom was really consistent force in my life, and my dad in my later years. But the desire to know and love people is something that is deeply ingrained in me.
I've seen that. We haven't had that many conversations, but that's come across for sure. That makes me think of there's what is it called? Laird Hamilton is a surfer, professional surfer, and he made like a surf ranch. And so like it's like perfect waves every time. But it's the example I'm thinking of was on a podcast they were talking about like if you go out to surf, you'll get I don't know, I've never been surfing, 5 or 10 good waves maybe in an afternoon. But if you go to the surf ranch, you get 100 in an hour. And so you can just reps. But that popped in my head when you were talking about like moving 15 times or however many different schools, because you're getting that many 15 times more people than a lot of people have interacted with, or like I don't know, 10 times more first impressions or something like that. And I'm sure like subconsciously or consciously you introduce yourself differently as you're meeting new people, and you're like, okay, that was weird, like that was an awkward interaction, I'm not going to introduce myself that way, versus I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think that the idea of I think something I pride myself on now, that is something I've worked really hard at, and I think people comment that they see this in me and it feels good. I feel proud of that I've cultivated this, and it's authenticity. And I think that I've had to work really hard at that, because when you do shift on your best day, you're reimagining yourself in the best possible way. You know, you're making the best of it. You're being optimistic. On your worst day, you're lying.
Right.
You're fabricating. Especially as you think about it as a young person, you're trying to figure out your moral center. You're trying to figure out how do I introduce myself, and the idea of like, who am I?
Right.
And how do I honestly articulate that to someone is something in my adult life that I feel like, on one hand, I think there's something powerful about just like owning who you are.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid, that's so hard.
Yeah.
Because you don't even know who you are. Right. How can you own it?
Right.
But the other thing I think is that I think it's an invitation for other people, because I think that one aspect of moving that much and transitioning schools that much is that you're lonely. Like so the positive is that your interior life gets really built out. Like there's a lot of scaffolding set up for what you think about and how you think about it. I'll give you an example. So I would spend a lot of time in libraries. So the library at my respective schools, I would spend time in, and I would read the newspaper, I would read books, I would just hang out in there. Why? Well, one, I'm like, man, I don't know these people, I don't know these kids. I'm like, it wasn't until I found common things like student government or basketball that I had like an instant network or an instant.
Right, yeah.
But when I was younger and I was just moving around, it's like, why is this sixth grader hanging out in the library reading the newspaper? So on one hand, I was developing thoughtfulness and a deep interior life. But on the other hand, your ability to articulate that to someone who's in the day-to-day, they're hanging out with friends, they're living moment to moment. And then it's like, I don't know that it's exactly the same as surfing, but the idea of like frequencies, or maybe I could picture a surfer talking about, like wavelengths or frequencies. So the frequency I was on was like deep interior life, very thoughtful, very slow. And then think about the average sixth grader, seventh grader, eighth grader.
Right. Not that way.
Not that way. Not measured, or typically, not measured. Very fast, very by the moment.
Yep. And
so, as I always joked when I was when I was a boy, I was like, I'm looking forward to being an old man.
Sure.
Because I felt like one. And I can't relate to the speed.
Yeah.
I can't relate to. And so I found, so it's this dichotomy of like loneliness leading to deep interior life, but then of course you want to relate to people. And I think as I get older, it's easier and easier to invite people into that interior life. And just anyone who goes to a coffee with me or hangs out with me will know that I often will just say, how are you? Especially now people are wanting to talk to me about my new venture, and I'm trying to make a habit of saying, we'll get to that in a minute. How are you?
Yeah.
And really what I'm trying to do there is slow down, and just give permission for us to have an authentic conversation about
Right.
About where we are. Because to your point about I like the surfer, we don't live with perfect waves.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. That's not real life. Yeah.
Yeah. So the waves are going to come when they're going to come. And so if we find a moment where we have a minute to breathe, we should use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you never know, there's a wave around the corner that's going to smack us.
Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioning thoughtfulness, I think that's a good word to describe talking with you. And I think again, we've been talking more and more now with my new role and your new role.
Yeah.
But I feel like it always comes across like you've kind of chosen your words carefully and you've thought through whatever we're talking about. You've previously thought through that. And I feel like I'm definitely not all that way. And like, especially again, with my new role at Stand Together, it's like, I haven't thought that much about a lot of this stuff before. It just wasn't part of my job, wasn't part of my life. And now it's like, okay, I'm thinking about these issues in Wichita more, but it's like, I'm hearing this stuff, but it's like, I need to take the time to slow down and like, okay, internalize, like, what does that actually mean for affordable housing or homelessness? Like, again, I see it, I experience it somewhat when I see people out in Wichita or at City Life, but I haven't internalized a lot of that, or what do I actually think versus what's being told to me. So it's like taking that time to slow down and think it through.
Well, I mean, you just entered into a whole body of thought right there that's pretty profound. Because I remember when Kate and I got married and we found out we were pregnant with our oldest, Anne, and I thought about it like mental folders. And I remember going to get the mental folder of being a dad, and there was nothing in it.
Sure.
And I remember saying that to Kate. And so we were like 24, 25 years old, and I was like, I've pre-thought about most things. Like, it's not that often that someone brings something up, and I say, I've literally never thought about that. I've thought about it. And on that one, I remember just being like, I have not thought that much about being a dad.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, what do I do?
Right.
I need to learn. I need to go talk to some other dads. I need to figure out, what is my philosophy on being a dad? And I think when you get into community work, I think I found myself in that. The most stark experience I can remember of I've not thought about that is when I was in the commercial roofing space, and I was starting to think about people coming out of addiction or out of that were justice involved, and they were coming into environments of like being ready for work, and then thinking about for all the ways that I had different obstacles and barriers, I also had a lot of privilege, and I was fortunate enough not to have a major bump in the road like a major addiction or incarceration or something like that. And so the idea of being ready to work, I was like, took that for granted. And so then you start, and you could easily say, well, someone's not ready to work. And what we tend to do, at least how I was brought up on, very conservative thinking, and then we want to assign that to character. We say, oh, they don't have a work ethic.
Yeah.
They are not ready to work. And in some cases, it's like, no, they have a work ethic. There's been some things that they have experienced that have made them not ready to work, and they can learn it. They just need a minute. They need a little bit more time. They need some more resources, and then they can be ready to work. And so when you start learning about second chance hiring, you start learning about workforce development, that was a whole folder of like, I don't know how to think about this. Yeah. And then as I started to think about it, then I had an opportunity I could think about it. KLC talks about it, the Kansas Leadership Center, when I'm definitely steeped in their framework, the usual and the unusual voices on a matter. And so the usual voices that I had heard were more conservative. And as I started to go research, I got exposed to me what were unusual voices I had not heard before about that topic. And so now I'm educating myself from that point of view. And in college, I did collegiate debate. And when you do debate, in a given semester, you have the same topic all semester. Okay. And then you argue both sides of it often. Like in a given tournament, you might debate 5 times, and you might debate 3 times on one side, 2 times on the other. So you get so familiar with the evidence, and you get so familiar with the arguments that you really leave those semesters going like, what do I think about that? I had my inclination and my early instincts of what I thought, but the more I learned, I changed my mind a few times.
Right.
And then when I heard more and more compelling arguments, I'm actually less sure. And we hear about that all the time when we grow up. Like, the mark of wisdom is not being as sure. Like, when you're young, you think wisdom would be like someone who knows the answer.
Right.
But as you get older, it's like wisdom is someone who is really actually pretty suspicious of someone who just knows the instant answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, a couple of things pop in my mind. It's like strong opinions loosely held.
Yes.
And so it's like, a semester worth of research into a topic, and kind of seeing where you actually lie, and not, again, like I mentioned, like you hear one thing, it's like, okay, do I believe that? Or like, I don't know, a lot of people like listen to Fox News and like you talk to them and you hear those points. It's like, okay, do you believe that or did you hear that?
Yeah.
And so like, what does that actually look like to internalize it and think it is really interesting to think about?
Yeah, and I think the nuance of community life and life in Wichita or life in any community, but is we all have been told things, we all have learned things, we're all curious about things, and then how do we pair up our ideologies? Because there's nothing wrong with having strongly held beliefs.
Right.
I think it's beautiful for someone to have a strong passion and conviction, and they can kind of let it rip. And then there's a Bible verse that talks about, it says, iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens the countenance of their friend. And so this idea of sharpening each other through our arguments is a lost art. We do get less sure about what we believe often. We get more curious about possible solutions, and then we find common ground. But it doesn't mean we find only common ground.
Right.
I think that's a misnomer to say, like, we're going to all sing Kumbaya and we're going to like find all this common ground. We might find a small sliver of common ground. But in terms of community trust and individual relationship, a small sliver goes a long way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, a lot of this stuff is like I thought some about, but I need to think more about. But like an issue today is it seems like people will take one aspect of like what I believe or what somebody believes and like they'll immediately won't listen to anything else that person says. And I think it's very important that it's okay to disagree. Like it's okay to have strong beliefs and it's okay to agree with somebody's strong beliefs. That doesn't mean we can't get along. And like, obviously there's some fundamental, like, okay, I'm not going to interact with that person, but like, I feel like it's like an outlash. And again, it's the vocal minority probably that are outspoken about this, whether it's the conservatives or the woke left or whatever people want to say. But it's like, we can all find common ground. Like we all want Wichita here in Wichita. We should all want Wichita to be a better place. But like I posted a video the other day of the biomedical center and like the crane was moving. So it's kind of cool to see like progress being made. And like I thought it was a very positive video. But then you read the comments and they're like, why is Wichita trying to be a big city? Like why are they getting rid of the old buildings and doing this? I'm like, okay, this is progress for Wichita. I don't know how I didn't even think of from the negative aspect of this, but I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think part of it goes to consensus as an ideology. You know, so like when we think about big community change of any kind, no matter what the issue might be, is the thing we're aiming at consensus? And I think in certain things the mark should be consensus, but in many others it's preference.
Yeah.
You know, what's the right way to grow Wichita?
Right.
How big should Wichita be? There's not a finite correct answer to either of those questions.
Right.
And so we're going to be talking about preferences, and we're going to be talking about directional strategy, not precise strategy. And people have room to disagree. And not everyone's going to be on board with the biomedical campus or whatever it might be. And to embrace it, that's okay. But I think where we can save ourselves some sleepless nights as leaders is to not think about it like the early adopter, the bell curve of change, if you're familiar. You know, the first 5 or 10%, the early adopters, and the idea of the people slowly coming, you know, across that bell curve, and it's not you that will convince them; it's the early adopters who will. Right. And then the people on the tail end of the bell curve, the laggards, I think is what they call it in that model. They're not going to come.
Right.
Now, they might be passionate about something else,
Yep.
and they're going to be the advocate for that. And I might not come along with them on that issue, and that's okay, because it's going to take more people doing more things for us to have the type of community we want,
Yeah.
doing different types of things.
Yeah.
And I think stressing that, command and control can be overrated.
Yeah.
We're not going to engineer this thing in this really precise way. We just need to align on our methodology and our values, and then allow for that difference.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that intro was a lot better and a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. That's amazing. That was a great conversation. So getting into kind of your career a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the first thing on your LinkedIn is Mahaney Group, but
Yeah.
you were at the Sod Shop before that.
Oh, yeah.
So just walk me through a little bit about Sod Shop. What was the transition out of that, and kind of your next steps?
Yeah, so the Sod Shop is owned, well, I think their ownership has changed some, but Ted and Tony Wilbur out of Valley Center had a commercial company called Green Glow, and it was a commercial landscape installing company or installation company, and they were starting to use more natural stone and more big rolls of sod in their landscaping work. And so they were starting to build out this business called the Sod Shop, and it was on 37th Street where the Sod Shop is now, where Metro and and there's a fence company, and most of those businesses weren't there, and they had a trailer. And I had, right out of college, I thought I wanted to go into ministry. And so I'd spent 3 years in ministry, and I'd known the Wilburs from church, and I had done some side jobs for them through my brother-in-law, Nick Cusick. I had laid sod, and I had mowed, and I had done a few different things during the summers. And I went to them, and our second son, Aubrey, was on the way, and I went to them and was like, I need a job. Like, I thought I was going to go into ministry. I've studied rhetoric and debate. I just need to earn some money, and like, can I mow, or can I lay sod, or can I do anything? And they were like, well, why don't you, if you're willing to get your CDL, your commercial driver's license, we need a delivery driver, and we need someone to help us think about dispatching.
Okay.
And you could come on and do that, and then if that goes well, you could be like an assistant manager, and if that goes well, we're opening this new building, and you could be the manager of the store.
Sure.
So I say all that to say the importance of like casting a vision, because I walked in like, can I mow some grass?
Right.
And they could have said, sure.
Right.
And I remember what I said to Ted. I said, I don't know anything about landscaping, and I don't really know anything about business, but other than that,
we're in. That's great.
But he was like, yeah, but I know your family, and I know your work ethic and your values, and you're a good communicator, and like, but he still gave me things to do.
Sure.
Like, show up, work hard, go get your CDL, and I have a lot of memories of driving a delivery truck with a mule, or it's called a mule or a donkey, the mobile forklift that's on the back of it, and unloading boulders and and pallets of stone and pallets of sod all over the city. So did that for a couple years in that context. Then the new building's getting built, and then worked for them and became the manager. And then as we grew, they were so great to work for, because they gave me, you've heard the term like entrepreneurship. They gave me a real safe laboratory to experiment,
Sure.
try new things in terms of marketing, in terms of supply chain, in terms of employee development, commercial sales. A lot of the things I learned in business, that was just my initial kind of laboratory.
Yeah.
And they were really great to work for.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing to like read about business, and there's one thing to like, all the experiments, that's where you learn everything. The failures and the successes and just tweaks and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the beginning of me learning that I was a process guy. I didn't think about myself as a process person. And, because I really value relationships and the relational aspect of things, but realizing like you need a system to track the relational work.
Yeah.
That's where I cut my teeth on that, was just realizing like you could have a great conversation with someone about their backyard and the products that they're going to need. But like, if you don't have an intake form, that you could train someone to also have that conversation,
Yeah.
then when it comes time to place the order,
Yeah.
what do you really have?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and if you don't get their phone number,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, for sure.
then you're probably not going to follow up on that sale. You know, so
Yeah.
like just the most basic things in business. I feel like that was a lab where I was able to put together sales and marketing and human resources and training with longer term development. And then you start to think about profitability and things like supply chain. All of that I learned working for Ted and Tony.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's why a lot of people say like, and nothing against people that get their MBA, but like there's the real world MBA,
Yeah.
which is literally just doing that for 2, 3, 5, 8 years,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yeah.
And like you learn so much more in the real world, so much faster.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of great businesses in Wichita, and I think that we shouldn't despise humble beginnings.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
I remember there was lots of times where I hadn't really grown my community development muscles yet. But people who knew me in college, that knew me in that debate, I was president of my college. They knew me in that context, and they'd be like, you know, people are going to be doctors and they're going to be lawyers, and you're like, what are you doing? You're like, you know, I'm running a sod company.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I remember feeling like insecure about that at times. But then as the years went by, it was like, no, I'm getting a real world MBA.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm learning how to do something I didn't know the term transferable skill then, but it definitely, I learned a lot of transferable skills.
Yeah. And I think it's cool that it kind of goes back to like the principle of like believing in people.
Yes.
Because like they didn't really have a reason to believe in you
No.
other than they knew your family and your virtues and your character. But like you didn't have the skills, like, but they
No.
believed in you and cast that vision. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next up was the Mahaney Group. So what was the decision to move on from the sod shop then into?
Really, it was circumstances. So it was the Great Recession. So the market crashes, and that business, we had grown it significantly, but it was like sitting on like a bit deep decline. And so through some conversations with Ted, who was a primary owner, just decided it was time for me to move on, and that business needed to downsize to weather the storm. And that I, you know, and on one hand, you know, he believed in me. He was honest with me about like, I think you're the most likely to land on your feet. Like I could see you doing
Sure.
other things. And
Yeah.
and so as we talked about that season and the season ahead, they treated me kindly in the transition. And then I was able to I started a consulting company to try to figure out what I wanted to do next. Cause I was starting to have a sense of like, I'm picking up these areas of business pretty quickly, and I'm understanding how they go together. And a lot of my my customers were small construction and small landscape construction companies, and I was noticing that a lot of those guys were in the grind, and they were good at selling or they were good at installing, but they weren't really that good at running their business. And you'd see a lot of businesses be cyclical and go in and out of business.
Yeah.
Like you'd see the same guy, and he'd have a different truck with a different logo.
Sure.
And he's like, yeah, I had to close that business because this didn't go well, and I'm starting a new one. So that like the hard work, the entrepreneurial mindset, but just like, I thought, well, what if I could come alongside a few of those people and maybe I could create a little business doing some consulting. And that opened up the window for, that went okay. I didn't do great at that. I mean, I paid the bills for that year, but nothing amazing happened. But I had a good friend, Mark Bolt, who had been working at the Charles Mahaney Roofing Company. And him and I were in a small group together in church, and we had known each other really well. And he was at a position where he was getting ready to buy Charles Mahaney Roofing Company, and he was debating the best method to do it. And we started having some conversations just as friends. And then we kind of hatched an idea that was like, well, what if I helped? And so in lieu of hiring a traditional business broker, we came to an agreement for me to put the deal together.
Nice.
Which I had never done before.
Right.
But I put together, and it was like, well, how are you going to do it? And so we, laid out, I'm going to write a business plan, and I'm going to build, we're going to find a lawyer, we're going to find an accountant, and we're going to go interview banks.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And so then through that process, but I had no plans of going into commercial roofing,
Right.
But I loved Mark. He was one of my best friends, and it was a good opportunity to help him. It was an opportunity for me and my family. And then as the deal got closer to closing, he offered and said, "Would you like to join Mahaney and the new ownership group as I start this out?" And it's like kind of jumped at it like this because I had just been researching the business for 2 months. And I'm like, this is a great business. It was a 120 plus year old business, just really stable clients. And I thought this could be fun. What's so funny is I didn't even consider that it was commercial roofing. For anyone who knows commercial roofing, they know what I'm talking about. Like, it is a hard business. And I'm not really in love with heights, Landon. Like,
Is it fair? Fair.
I remember the first time where we had come to terms on me working there, and we put in the buy-sell agreement that the previous owner needed to hang out with me for a few months to teach me some things, and go into the first job and just being like, "Have you ever climbed a 40-foot ladder before? Have you ever climbed like a?"
Have I personally?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm afraid of heights, but I'm just a little sketched out by big ladders like that.
Yeah, like a 40-foot ladder, when you have it set up, when you get past the first maybe 10 or 15 feet, it really starts to bow and bounce. And I remember starting to climb up that ladder, and I've shared about my faith, and I remember I paused, and I'm like a brand new vice president in this new company. And I can feel all the eyeballs watching me. And I just remember just going like, "Jesus, you've got to do this." Like, and I just closed my eyes and I just hustled up that baby as fast as I could. And I'm sure from the people watching me that I didn't go very fast.
Right,
I was, they call it hugging the ladder, where you're really.
Oh yeah.
But I made it to the top, and then I climbed ladders for the next 12 years. And it was a great season. That season was similar to working for Ted and Tony, in the sense that Mark is just an entrepreneur and a half, and he has a work ethic unparalleled. And he's kind of one of those guys where it's like, if you can keep up with him, you've got the keys to the kingdom.
Sure.
He's like, "I'm going this way." His leadership style is very bold and like, "I'm going this way, and if you want to come, then like, let's go."
That's great. Yeah.
And then as time went on, as I got my bearings and became a good executive and became competent in commercial estimating and commercial sales, then I started to get my own visions for what Mahaney could be, and shared those with him. And then I moved into full-time development. I remember him and I went to a lunch. This is advice for any young career professionals out there. I would say bend your job until it breaks. Because I didn't love being a commercial roofing salesman and project manager. I loved what it was teaching me. It was getting me up early. It was teaching good habit formation in me. It was teaching me discipline. It was teaching me more sales skills. It was getting me proximate to people that were the second chance culture I was talking about. Like, so many things I loved about it. But the part of me that wants to think about the future was like slowly dying a little bit. And I went to lunch with Mark and I said, I have to think about ideas in the future. And I have to think about how it all impacts people. And I get we're a commercial roofing company.
Right.
And so if I can't do that here, like, let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
And then that led to a really time of flourishing for Mahaney, because he was like, no, like, why can't you do it here? And what would it look like for you to do it here? And so through a series of a few months, we worked out what it could look like.
Yeah.
And then what that turned into was us growing and acquiring some new businesses. And it turned into really growing the culture at Mahaney. And it got me off of project management and put me fully into executive leadership and into external development. And that's where Mahaney Roofing went to Mahaney Group. And because it through acquisition and starting some different businesses, it developed five divisions of construction within that kind of a specialty subcontracting group. And so, yeah, man, just one of the sweetest experiences of my life.
Yeah.
And I remember when I resigned, to go really spend my energy full time on community development. I mean, Mark and I just looked at each other, and he said something to the effect of like, "I can't believe you made it 12 years." And I'm like, I know, it's crazy, but it's one of the best sets of 12 years of my life.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. He allowed you kind of the flexibility and the freedom. Well, he had a strong leadership style, but he trusted you to, like, you weren't necessarily fulfilled just doing roofing. You wanted to see the bigger picture and the bigger ideas.
Yep.
But like, you could kind of actualize that and self-actualize that. And he believed in you to let that happen. And so, again, you probably would have been gone way before that if he said no.
Yeah.
We're a roofing company.
Yeah.
But you guys, it was kind of a good collaboration there. That's cool.
Well, and I think it's something I think about now, like with what I'm getting ready to do. And it's something with what I just got done doing at the Kansas Leadership Center that the CEO there, Dr. K. McMorgan, and I would talk about is like, what we say is like, it's always 72 degrees in KLC. Like, and it's a really nice office. But the people we're helping and training, for environments that are not 72 degrees, you know, that whether it's figurative or literal, the temperature is cold or hot.
Sure.
And I think construction is the same way. Like, it's cold or hot, literally. Like, the guys are outside and it's cold or hot.
Yeah.
And the groundedness, like when you're with someone who's really close to the work, whether it's community development work, working on, you know, anti-violence campaign or foster care or whatever it might be, or you're around someone who's in the trades, the groundedness that they have, the clarity, the moral clarity they have about what the right thing to do is, because they're not thinking about things in the abstract.
Right.
They're thinking about things in a very specific container.
Yeah.
And the moral clarity and efficiency of thought that they have, that people like Mark have, I honestly miss being around it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find when you start doing more and more macro work, because more and more macro community or economic development becomes almost like philosophy. You're just talking about ideas. So it's like the ideas without the applicational environment. I think that's something I'm going to really look for in my next season is what are those safe containers to get as real and practical and down to earth as possible.
Yeah.
So that we don't build things in the abstract.
Yeah.
That are just philosophies.
Right. And I think that's, you could get tripped up, or like what a lot of organizations are like, they try to do like the top down and like the philosophical and tell everyone how to do stuff. But it's like, no, you have to literally go to the bottom and listen to what those people, and
Yes.
I've heard you mention that as one of your goals for Lead Wichita is like going to talk to these organizations,
Right.
and like truly listen to what their needs are, what their ideas are, because they're closest to those problems. And like, that's the only way to make a strong foundation. You're not going to get it from just preaching from the top.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you learn about schools of thinking, you intuitively come to that, and then you run into organizations like Stand Together with their principle-based management, or KLC, or the Center, the Institute for Human-Centered Design, or design thinking, and then you go like, oh, like there's some really smart people who have really thought this through, and they've proven that what I was coming to with my instincts is validated.
Yep.
And human-centered design is definitely one of those.
Oh, for sure.
And the Stand Together principle-based management, they all have different ways to describe it. But what we're really all saying is listen to people closest to the challenge, and let them inform some of those foundational elements.
Yeah. It's almost funny, like you experience all of this stuff and then you read about like the principles or philosophy, like, oh, wow, you could point back to everything so easily then.
Yep.
Okay, so Lead Wichita. You're going into, if you want to touch on KLC a little more, you can, but I want to talk about Lead Wichita.
Yeah.
So what is Lead Wichita for people that don't know, and what is your role there?
Yeah. Lead Wichita is a nonprofit that's existed for a few years now. It was really started out as just from a group of volunteers. Lead Wichita originally was Ben Hutton and a few other people who were putting on an event called the Global Leadership Summit. And the Global Leadership Summit is a simulcast event out of Chicago that brings in subject matter experts on different leadership topics for 2 days of kind of inspirational, sorry. So the Global Leadership Summit is an event that brings in, it's simulcast from Chicago, and it brings in 2 days worth of content, kind of 30 minutes at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool though, because it's you're going to get a pastor or a faith leader, you're going to get a professor from Harvard, you're going to get someone who's a social activist, you're going to get all these different kind of people who are approaching leadership from their vantage point or their perspective, and you kind of get their nuggets. You know, you get the best of the best of what they're learning. So Lead Wichita has existed primarily just to launch that into the city. It was originally out of Pathway Church. They held some initial Global Leadership Summit gatherings, and then Ben's the one that had the vision for, we need to get this in the city. We need to get it where people from all sectors can experience it. And so that's been going on since I think 2014, 15.
Oh, okay.
And then over time, myself, Steve Dixon, and Dion Gates, and lots of other people came alongside that movement and started to imagine what else it could be for the city. And so, okay, great. It's great for 2 days in August to be inspired.
Right.
But now what? Kind of so what, now what? So now we say Lead Wichita exists to equip, inspire, and connect individuals and organizations for greater community impact.
Mm-hmm.
So other ways we do that currently is we host the Wichita Prayer Breakfast. And then we have two other initiatives that, and remember that Lead Wichita, prior to me coming on as CEO, has been 90% volunteer-led.
Mm-hmm.
So the one person that was had more capacity to put towards it was Alicia Butler. And Alicia is amazing, but she only had so much time as essentially an event director, putting on the prayer breakfast, putting on the summit, and then organizing volunteers a little bit in between. And so the other things that volunteers have been able to do is build out a city catalyst model. City catalysts are essentially, think about like small groups.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all this library of content. Why don't you break it down into 15 or 20-minute increments and use it for a lunch and learn? Use it for a small group conversation. And so there's city catalyst groups that have been meeting for several years in all kinds of different contexts. And then lastly, we started a thing we've called Access and Inclusion, which is about, okay, it's one thing for people to come to the summit, but two other aspects. What if we took the content from the summit and we took it to other environments? So like last couple of years, for example, we had it at Hutch Correctional Facility. We had it at Sedgwick County Jail, and we had it in some other environments where people wouldn't normally be able to go, obviously in those contexts, but we used that as a satellite. And we had facilitators come, and we had snacks and things of that nature, and people could take in that content.
Right.
And then we created a program called Rising Leaders, which is when you identify through other nonprofits, people who they would benefit from going to the summit, but they can't get off. If they say they could get off work, but they can't afford to be off work.
Right.
So we created a stipend program with some donors where we'd say, let's identify 10 or 20 leaders, and let's actually pay them a stipend.
Right.
They can get off work. Let's pay them what their equivalent of roughly $15 an hour to take those 2 days, and let's invest in them. Mm-hmm. And then let's ask them. There's a saying like, no one rises to low expectations. Mm-hmm. Like let's challenge them that if we invest in them, could they invest in some other rising leaders that we help out the next year?
Sure.
And so that's developed a cool ecosystem within that Access and Inclusion Committee. So that's what it's been doing.
Yeah.
And it's been doing that, what I just described, between the Wichita Prayer Breakfast, the Global Leadership Summit, the City Catalyst small groups, Access and Inclusion, for the last 3 or 4 years with pretty good success. What it's getting ready to do, with me joining the team, is some new programming. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to be launching a tool called the State of Our City Dashboard. And the State of Our City Dashboard it highlights what they call realities. We might call them issues. Mm-hmm. And so the hope here is that, okay, you have an ecosystem of a few thousand people in Wichita who attend the prayer breakfast or are inspired through the Global Leadership Summit or attend a small group. And just like any program like Leadership Wichita with the Chamber, you go through that type of program and you go like, now what do I do? How do I apply it?
Yep.
And I believe that the State of Our City dashboard can be a real catalyst for exposing people to the realities among certain issues. And then through that process of seeing the statistics on that topic, they could hear about other organizations that are making progress in that, testimonials, and then they could find ways to get involved.
Yeah.
And so, we talk about the human action model. I think it's simply that. It's like expose the community to compelling statistics, show organizations that are having success in that, and then give a practical on-ramp for people to get involved. So the issues that we're going to highlight are affordable housing, foster care, life expectancy, recidivism, addiction and mental health, and economic mobility. And so the State of Our City dashboard will have a roughly a 6-month kind of beta learning time period where we'll be putting that out there. What will be missing that I'm looking forward to forming with Back to Human-Centered Design with the help of the community is, what's the transformational goal on one of those issues? So like take recidivism, for example. Like say when the dashboard comes out, you'll be able to see recidivism for Wichita as a whole. You'll be able to drill down per neighborhood and see how recidivism changes per neighborhood. But then what's that 10-year goal that we could be aiming at? What is a transformational, transcendent goal that we could really rally people on?
Right.
Back to the thing about no one rises to low expectations. It's like, I love Wichita. I love the economic development, community development, workforce development ecosystem. But sometimes it feels like we're spinning our wheels. And there's great people, well-meaning people, talented people working on these issues. But if you ask me, I've been involved in that type of work for roughly 15 years. And if you ask me today on some of those issues, like, how are we doing? What's the score?
Right.
I would struggle to answer. And I think most people in Wichita would.
Right.
And so I really hope that Lead Wichita taking on the State of Our City dashboard is a way that we can elevate some particular issues. It doesn't mean those are the most important issues. It doesn't mean that they're the only issues.
Right.
But we can elevate a few. And then we can just ask people, are we okay with this reality?
Yeah.
And if we're not, what are we willing to do to affect it and to improve the quality of life for people that are both working in that space and the people that they're serving? And so that's what I hope Lead Wichita, my new role as CEO, is to help build out the team to take on that dashboard, grow the things we've been doing, but really grow the community engagement aspect of the State of Our City dashboard. And the dashboard is only a tool.
Yeah.
It's really about telling the stories of people that are working in the space and then getting more and more actionable ways that people can get involved. I believe that Wichita is full of people who want to make a difference, who want to see their community flourish and thrive. And often they just don't know a thing. Of course they can donate money, but what's an actionable thing that they can do with them and their family to make a difference on that topic?
Yeah.
And I think lastly, I'd say one thing that I think will be really important, you'll hear me talk a lot over the next several years about cross-sector collaboration. We need more of it. And because businesses can learn from faith, and faith can learn from businesses, and government can learn from the nonprofit sector, and philanthropy can learn, all of these sectors can learn from each other, and they all have unique geniuses, they have unique capabilities, and they work together some, but I think there is an untapped well of greater collaboration when we work together.
Yeah.
And I think specifically for the faith community, Lead Wichita is a faith-based organization, and I think that one of the main things I hope to do is to go to my friends and brothers and sisters in the faith community and say, there's a phrase I like, which is this our problem, or is the fact that this isn't our problem our problem? And I think that any number of those issues, we tithe to our churches, we pay our taxes, we give to local charities, but I think we can do more.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to see a city that we all hope to live in the coming 5, 10, 20 years, it's going to require people getting outside their comfort zone and committing more time, more resources, more collaboration, more energy And I think that one of the things I'll do is really be kind of a chief ambassador for that, just inviting people from all sectors into the work.
What do you think the biggest challenge or some of the biggest challenges are, or what makes it difficult to do, or I don't know, inhibit some of that cross-sector collaboration? Is it like something that comes to mind is like, you mentioned it's a faith-based organization. Like how do you reach to somebody that might immediately turn their brain off or immediately turn their back because maybe they aren't a faith-based person and they're like, oh, well, that's a church organization. I don't want to be a part of that. How do you deal with the cross-sector collaboration there?
Yeah, I think that I've been trying to use the hypothesis language. I have been in workforce development, community development, leadership development, for a long time. But back to what we were saying earlier about wisdom, and I'm trying to start with curiosity and humility and think about my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that people struggle with cross-sector collaboration for a myriad of reasons, one of which is that they're busy. There's only so many hours in a day, and it's one more thing to do.
Yep.
And I don't think you can overstate that one.
Yeah. I mean, I can empathize with that with a lot of stuff. So,
yeah. I mean, now back to the Kansas Leadership Center, we talk about benign or tough interpretations. That's a pretty benign interpretation. Back to Mark Bolt, my good friend, he would always say something back, I said he was really pragmatic. If we were having this conversation, he would say something like, people do what they want.
Yeah.
It's like, don't tell me they don't have enough time.
Yeah.
People do what they want.
Well, it's like, just go. That's what people say. Like, I didn't have time to do this. Like, okay, what's the screen time on your phone?
Exactly.
Like, there was probably some time there.
Yeah. And the KLC principle there that we would elevate at KLC would be choose between competing values.
Yep.
So when someone says, I don't have enough time, well, we all have 24 hours in a day. The truth is that there's a value of something that you're elevating, and then you're saying that other thing's not as important.
Yeah.
And that's not morally wrong. It's just like call a thing a thing.
Yeah, no judgment, but it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So but I do think choosing between competing values and the grind are a big part of it. I think you hit on one of them earlier where you said something about like this idea that we judge if someone has a belief, we tend to. Like you didn't say it that way. It was something like they think this one thing about something, and then I think they think this about everything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a social science term for that. But I think that's a big part of this is that when we cast a stereotype on someone on the left or a Christian or someone on the right, what we're saying is because you believe this about that issue, we can't work together on this other issue because I'm presuming what your values are based on that I disagree with you about that one thing.
Right.
So I think a thing we could really do to help ourselves in this is to just appreciate the fact that we are nuanced, complicated, beautifully diverse organisms that believe all sorts of things. And here's the truth. And this is hard for people to hear. It's hard for me to hear. We're hypocrites. We conveniently are very self-righteous about what people should and shouldn't do.
Yep.
But if you took that same value that we elevated on one topic and you pushed us on another topic, we would eventually break our own values.
Yeah.
If we're being honest with ourselves. Like the odds of us being morally consistent across every walk of area of our life is really low. And so what I'm trying to say when I say that is that I think judgment, good old-fashioned self-righteous judgment, keeps us from working across factions. It keeps us working, it inhibits cross-sector collaboration because we are prejudging other people for who they are or who they hang out with, and we're saying, I can't be a part of them because of that.
Right.
And until we get past that, well, here's what's going to happen. People will work with people who are the same as them.
Yep.
And I've been writing about this for a while. I wrote a piece a while back on a blog about, we talk about tolerance in the civic engagement space. And often, I remember when I wrote the essay, I sent it to a few different friends and said, hey, will you give me feedback on this essay? And most people wrote back and said, I love the essay. I struggle with the word tolerance. And the tolerance has gotten a bad name. And what the essay was about how tolerance, in the same way we think about tolerance and civic engagement, in the free market, we talk about innovation and diversity of ideas, or Koch might say creative destruction. So we've got to tear these ideas apart so that we can build them back better.
Right.
And that's really hard to do when you're in an echo chamber.
Yep.
You know, so we need to get out of our echo chambers, but you can't get out of your echo chamber if you're so busy judging everyone who's not in yours.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think something that came to mind when you were saying that was, I can't remember who said it, if it's like a quote or if it's just an idea, but it's like you attribute, like somebody else wrongs you or something, and you immediately think they're a bad person.
Yeah.
But if you were to do that same thing, you could have just been having a bad day.
Yeah.
And so it's just the idea of like, you don't know anybody's whole story or whole background. Like, let's not judge each other on a single interaction or single idea or thought. Like, try to understand holistically, and there's probably something you agree upon. And
yeah, I saw that firsthand in my chamber involvement, and then the 3 years I was at the Kansas Leadership Center. I got to work with people I was traditionally known as someone probably on the right. I was the head of the chamber PAC. I was on the Kansas Chamber Board. I was on the Wichita Chamber Board. And I endorsed conservative candidates, raised money for conservative candidates, and people knew me in that context. And then as I started to work on more and more community issues, and then I went to go work at KLC, I was around more people on the left. And there's not that people that KLC is only people on the left, but I'm saying it serves a lot of people and a lot of different organizations. And I was just around people on the right and the left. Whereas before I was really with only people on the right.
Sure.
And that question you just said of like, tell me why you care about that. Like when I would find myself where I knew someone on the right of an issue and I knew someone on the left of an issue, and I would see them struggling. So I'd see them in at a mixer or something at KLC, and I'd say, hey, you over here, come over here.
Yeah.
Have you met so-and-so? And tell them what you told me about why you care about this issue. And then they would start talking, and I'd kind of back away, and then you'd see them getting going. And I think that humanization of our stories, and that we are complicated creatures, and that we want to be understood.
Yeah.
And I think that is a thing that you've caught me at the very beginning of a thing in starting Lead Wichita. So getting my ideas out of philosophy and into application.
Right.
But one thought that I've been thinking a lot about is grace. And what would it look like to assume positive intent and extend each other grace?
Yep.
So say that we're in the middle of something on foster care, or, like fast forward a year and a half from now. Say we're successful in building a more diverse, more robust coalition working on recidivism, honoring the people that have been grinding on the work for a generation, that they're deep in it, coming alongside them, thinking about how we support them, drawing new resources into the work, measuring the outcomes, together creating an ambitious, transformational goal. We're cooking, right? And then someone does something, and it's in the news, and it offends people. What would it look like for us to have a coalition that was strong enough that we could go, I don't know what they meant by that, but I'm going to assume I'm going to assume positive intent.
Right.
And I know them, and they're a passionate person, and I'm going to assume positive intent, and I'm going to extend them grace. And I'm just going to go talk to them.
Yeah.
Instead of canceling them, instead of shaming them, instead of rallying people against them, I'm going to go talk to them. And I think we need more of that in Wichita.
We need a lot more of that.
We need people assuming positive intent of one another and extending each other grace. And if we're honest with ourselves, Landon, I'm a high performer. I've had a lot of success in business. I love to perform at a high level. And I think people who are performing at a high level often to slow down and talk about the soft aspects of let's extend each other grace.
Right.
But I'd like to frame it in a different way. Like, it's not soft.
Right.
Grace is like oil in our engine. I mean, without it, the car's going to break down.
Right.
And so if we want to be high performing, we need to have more diverse teams.
Yep.
And if we're going to have more diverse teams, we're going to disagree often.
Yep.
And that's going to be good because it's going to lead to more innovation and more risk taking. But if we have more risk taking, once in a while, we're going to step in it.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And when we do, by golly, not if, when we do, could we assume positive intent and could we extend each other a little bit of grace? And I think Wichita is a good-sized community. We talk about it being a big, small town.
Yep.
It's the type of place where if a few people would extend a few other people some grace, it would go a long way. Mm-hmm. And so back to cross-sector collaboration, I just think that's one of my hypotheses is that we could, that people don't always extend each other grace.
Yep.
And I think that makes it hard to take those risks because why would I put my neck out there if I'm just going to get shamed for it?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very good point. Very well said. One of the quotes that came up, I was listening to or reading something, I believe it was Todd Rose, who I'm not exactly sure his role, but he does a lot of research stuff into like into like human. I don't even know what it is, interaction. I'm speaking. I haven't read a whole lot on him, but it was interesting because he mentioned that Americans want to contribute to their communities. There's a strong desire for Americans to contribute to their communities, but follow-up question in the survey, they don't feel like they're doing a good job. And so back to the state of the city, I think it's interesting. You said one of the points, but like the statistics, it's like, okay, one, people might just not know. And so you mentioned like, whatever, people are going to do what they're going to do. One of it's like, they might just not know about this issue. And so the statistics are important. There's the story aspect of it. It's like, okay, I see the statistic, and then it's like, what can I even do about that? Like, but then you see the people that are succeeding at solving whatever that issue is. And then the last part is like, people might know about this issue like homelessness or foster care, but like they have no idea how they can help.
Yeah.
And because that some of it just seems way too big, like affordable housing or foster care. Like, what am I going to do about it? Like, I can't do foster care or whatever that issue is. But like, there's ways to get involved in everything, and I think it's going to be really important to show people like, here are some easy steps to get involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite authors is a gentleman named Stephen Garber, and in his book Visions of Vocation, he talks about revelation, which is the data, the knowledge, and then responsibility. What am I going to do about it? And then he talks about relationships and proximity. And like, if you don't have a proximate way, you know, a way that's close enough that you could reach out and grab it to do something about whatever it was, then you're probably not going to do it.
Right.
So I think Lead Wichita has to partner, and we won't do a lot of this as we won't be the primary mechanism. Often what we're going to do is be partnering with people who are already doing the work.
Right.
So the actionable volunteerism opportunities, occasionally there'll be things with Lead Wichita, but probably more often than not, it'll be us elevating other organizations who are already doing the great work and just showing like, what is it you need more of?
Right.
And if actionable volunteerism is a thing they need, let's help tell that story, and let's help put a way that's proximate, that's close to that person where they could say yes to taking action. Yeah.
And I think that's just leveraging everyone's comparative advantage. You can't do everything, but there's already a lot of great nonprofits doing great work. So how can we leverage those? Out of respect for your time, I'm not even exactly sure what time it is, but out of respect for your time, I'll just kind of wrap it up with one question.
Yeah.
But what does Wichita mean to you?
Well, Wichita's home. And I think it means to me, I believe that God loves Wichita. And I know God loves everywhere. But the beauty, I think reigniting and reimagining the divine imagination is something I think a lot about. And like, if the God that I believe in is real, then I'm 1 in a billion, and I'm 1 in a billion. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, I'm 1 in a billion, but also God loves me, and God loves my city. And I think Wichita is a place, and this is true of anyone's home, but to me, when I walk down the street and I see someone hurting, Wichita is a place where we should be able to help that person.
Mm-hmm.
And Wichita is a place where when you see people with just downcast eyes and lonely, we should be able to invite them into whatever it is we're doing, whether it's something at church or a sports team or, volunteerism or whatever it is. It's like Wichita is a place that wouldn't it be cool if the main story about Wichita was people knew it was a place where they could receive grace, that they could be loved, and that they could seek the opportunities for themselves and their families. And so it's just like Wichita is the environment and the home base for me where I've got to see opportunities come into realities. And I believe that if more of us can take that approach and we can see, well, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I remember when I was in commercial construction, I would get to hang out with a lot of commercial developers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever hung out with commercial developers, they're going fast. They're doing lots of things. But the moment you get alone with them and you start talking about that dilapidated building, they just start spitting fire about that's not a dilapidated building. And they start telling you what it's going to be.
Mm.
It could be this. It could be that. If we just did this, if we just did that, we could go get this. We could go talk to so-and-so and we could do this. And then we could put this next door to it. And if we did that, we could, and they just start describing this almost infinite opportunity. And someone could easily walk by that dilapidated building and go like, that's a dilapidated building. And like, I'm just going to keep on walking. But a commercial developer, they literally drive around
Sure.
looking for dilapidated buildings.
Right.
And then if you get alone with them in their truck or in their car, they'll tell you their imagination about what it could be. And as I spent time with some of those guys, they turned into some of my best friends. And I would say, why don't we look at people that way? And of course they agree and go like, yeah, why don't we? And it's like, that's to me how this comes together for Wichita is like, let's see Wichita for not just what it is, but what it could be. And let's not build these things in the abstract, but let's build them with people in mind, with individuals, with families in mind. And at the end of the day, we all want to be loved and we all want to belong. And so Wichita, on its best day, is a place where we can all belong and we can all be loved.
I think that is a fantastic place to finish it. Damon, I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you, learn more about Lead Wichita?
Yeah, so you can hit me up at damon@leadwichita.org. And of course, on social platforms, Lead Wichita is on there, and I'm on there. And then on our website, leadwichita.org. And then stay tuned at some point after the prayer breakfast, we're going to be launching kind of the kind of beta learning 5 or 6 months with the State of Our City dashboard.
Yep.
So my ask for people listening to this would be in May, click on that. We're going to have a survey tool where you can tell us what of these realities
Yep.
You resonate with, or which ones we should be covering that we're not,
Yep.
and what are organizations that we should be highlighting. And so I really want to hear from others about what they see when they look at the State of Our City dashboard. And I don't want anyone to think we're done. Like, we're not releasing a solution that's done. We're releasing a tool that we're gonna learn, and we need the community to give us input to make it better.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate it, Dame. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.